All right. Thank you. Hand-drawn maps, or maps that kind of look hand-drawn but aren't hand-drawn, and back and forth, and who knows, right? Let's dive in. How many of you have ever heard of this book before? The Nature and Art of Workmanship. It's incredible. You should put this on your Amazon wish list. So in it, it's written by David Pye. It's just foundational concept for me. And he talks about the workmanship of risk and the workmanship of certainty. And so the kind of extreme examples of this are the workmanship of risk is just this kind of free form, hand-drawn, no templates, no straight edges. You're just diving in. You have full control, but you don't have much certainty of the outcome. And repeatability is kind of difficult or impossible. Whereas the workmanship of certainty, you're using tools and neat lines and straight edges and guides and jigs and templates, and you're very certain of your outcome, but creative divergence can be very difficult, right? So it's kind of hard to get something unique and stumble onto a happy accident. The workmanship of risk and the workmanship of certainty. And I can appreciate both of these things, and I engage in both of these things in my life. But I'm really interested in just smashing these two things together. And a while back, I actually read Moby Dick, right? I did it. I was like, I'm a big boy, I'm gonna read Moby Dick. My brother was reading it and he said, it's actually surprisingly funny. I was like, funny? Isn't it like boring and long? No, it's hilarious. At first it's hilarious, and then it gets long. Anyways, there's a whole chapter dedicated to this map right here. A map of whale species and sightings gridded out. It was just this remarkable chapter. It was so interesting and detailed in the description, and it's in Moby Dick, right? I thought it was invented. And so I looked it up, and sure enough, this map is real, and it exists. And I looked at it, and I thought, this is a beautiful map, right? This is done in an age when people have kind of, you've got these drafts tables, and they're using pens, and it was remarkably scientific and beautiful, but it was also hand done. There was a lot of workmanship of certainty here with the straight edges and the guides, a lot of workmanship of risk, and I thought it was fantastic. Also, here's another work. So that map was done by a person named Matthew Murray, and here's another one by Matthew Murray. So the Bathymetric Contours, one of the first bathymetric cartographic analysis of the North Atlantic. And I really loved how he used texture right at the edges to give a sense of elevation. To my opinion, he kind of reversed it though, because it looks like they're popping out at me, you know, they're little drop shadows. But I mean, he's kind of inventing this, right? So we can give him some credit. But anyways, I really liked that stipple effect. Also, I grew up reading this book, right? Turning these, how many of you guys have read this book? All right, so good. Where the Sidewalk Ends, and Shel Silverstein illustrated all these, and he used this kind of really kind of remarkable pen stroke and a lot of stippled shading, and I thought that was great as a kid, and I try to copy it. I'm also a big fan of the website, the Cartographers Guild. Do you guys know cartographersguild.com? Unbelievable work here. These are incredible, and most of these people are illustrators. They're not GIS people. They aren't trained geographers generally. They're illustrators, and they're working with manual tools, physical tools. They're working in Illustrator, and they're doing amazing cartography, right? I call myself a cartographer sometimes, but these people are really cartographers, and I was like, wow, I want to make something like that. You know, I'm jealous. I was jealous of these people. So my sister and her husband recently kind of cashed in, or cashed out, I suppose, and bought a little place on a lake in northern Michigan. And here's a shot of it. Don't be too jealous, because most of the year it looks like this, right? I'm usually not there then. And I thought, you know, it'd be kind of a neat gift for them if I could paint a map of their lake, right? The community is called Carp Lake, but a couple decades ago they rebranded the lake itself to be Paradise Lake. So Paradise Lake within the town of Carp Lake. So I thought, all right, let's I can do this, right? I used to watercolor a little bit in high school and in college. I minored in art. I'm going to do this. I'll dominate it. It's going to be great. So I had this paper laying around, and my wife's watercolors here, and I took a an existing map of the bathymetry of their lake, and I gridded it up. This is a trick my mom taught me, who also happened to be my middle school art teacher. She said, just draw a grid over your map, and then you just have to draw a bunch of little versions of something, and they all connect with each other, and you don't get stuff that's distorted. And I was like, wow, this is a great trick. I still use it. So I was gridding out my paper, and I sketched out the contours, and I really liked it. It was kind of a fun, tactile approach. I was feeling connected to the geography in a way that I never had been when I'm just kind of working in the digital environment, clicking and pushing pixels around, which is kind of interesting. And then I started watercoloring it, and I hated it. It looked terrible. I thought it was going to be this beautiful thing, and I'd watercolor it, and I'd be done, and I just looked at it, and I was like, boy, this is a real dog's dinner. But I was like, well, what would Shel Silverstein do, right? Which I always ask myself. And so I added these stipples here, and I kind of had this Matthew Murray-like effect, although I, made mine look recessed instead of elevated. And then I was happier, right? And so I started filling it out with a little bit of detail and color and colored pencil and that kind of thing. It was a lot of fun, right? But it was a remarkable experience for me to actually take a pen to a paper and draw geography instead of process it through a software tool. And so, I'm on a roll. I'm going to make one for my sister. She lives in Hood River, and Hood River, of course, has this amazing topography, so I tried my hand at Hillshade. It was fun, and it's kind of a unique version of Hillshade, not very accurate or precise, but it was fun, and she liked it enough anyway. And so I made one for my dad, too. I'm going to do a bathymetric map of the Straits of Mackinac, which is where he lives. So I gridded it out, of course, with the contour lines there, and, wailed away at it. And it was a lot of fun. It was this really rewarding experience. But I wanted to have that aesthetic in the digital environment, too, because on my dad's map, I missed an island there, kind of up in the north, and I had to kind of re-pencil it back in and give it a land tint, but it was still kind of watercolored, and so now it's just too green. And maybe I wanted to zoom in or zoom out a little bit or pan over, but I can't do that because I'm stuck in the physical environment. Has a lot of benefits, but also a lot of negatives, right? Workmanship of risk. And I was like, I want to do the workmanship of certainty, but have it look like the workmanship of risk. And I was like, how do I just kind of run this through the machine backwards, right? Like when Ferris Bueller took the car and they found out that all those miles had been packed onto it, and they're like, what do we do? My dad's going to find out. And he says, well, it's easy. We're just going to drive home backwards. So I was like, well, maybe we can drive home backwards and make some digital maps that look hand-drawn. So I took a photograph of this watercolor paper and a little photograph of a watercolor swatch, and they're all white because in ArcGIS, if you tint something that's an image, you can apply a color, and it'll paint in any kind of hue to the existing whiteness of that image. And you can assign it all kinds of dynamic colors, and it's a lot of fun. So here is here's the bathymetry, a simple bathymetry of the Straits of Mackinac and Lake Superior, Lake Michigan, Lake Huron. And I just had a scribble of pencil, and I used that as a repeating line stroke. And this is fully digital. And that means I can paint it in digitally, right? And if I don't like the area, I can zoom in, I can zoom out, and I can pan it. It'll still be painted for me. I don't have to throw it away and repaint. I can add in some pen strokes, like Shel Silverstein might do, and some stippled offset, like Matthew Murray might do. And then I can look at this map and say, well, you know what? It's actually kind of cool if I just did the pen and pencil, right? I can take away the watercolor layer because it's digital. And so there's this kind of fun freedom I was finding in making something with the workmanship of certainty, but it had the aesthetic appeal of the workmanship of risk. What a cheat, right? But I love that. It's a lot of fun. So I was having a good time, right? My creative brain is kind of blasting together with my analytical brain, and I encourage you guys all to try this, right? It's like that brain stem was just growing, and the two parts of my brain were coming together. It's really invigorating. And so I just made a style. You can make reusable styles for points, lines, and polygons and share it out with the world. And then all of a sudden, you're teaching people how to make paintings, and they're making paintings and showing you the results. And it was a lot of fun. And it looks like this. Here's some examples. Here's some aspect maps. Here's some simple landform maps. This is all digital. But I like also, in addition to those watercolor maps, I also like those kind of scratchy, hatchery, hand-drawn maps on parchment, right? Like a pirate map. And you can totally do that too, right? So instead of watercolor background, you can just use a parchment image. And instead of pencil and watercolor fills, you can just use a scratchy pen stroke appearance, and it'll just repeat for you wherever you want it to go digitally. And it's a lot of fun, and the result is pretty cool. We can even get maps that look like those caterpillar mountains that they were so into drawing a couple hundred years ago with field surveys. Iceland, what topographic map exploration would be complete without a map of Iceland, right? And I saw this map. Do you guys know who made this? Who made this? Shout it out. This is a hand-drawn map by our nation's first president, George Washington, who was a cartographer, which totally rules. I think that's fantastic. George Washington was a cartographer. Of course he was a cartographer. Isn't that great? And I looked at this and I loved his trees. I loved his lines, kind of naive, hurried, but practiced pen stroke. It was great. And again, I was a little bit jealous. I'm like, man, I wish I could draw maps like George Washington. But I caught myself. I'm like, man, Nelson, you're crazy. George had a line compass and a pen and a pencil and a bunch of sweat, right? But look at what you've got available to you. You can do this too. And so I sampled some of his actual textures and made some assets, right? Some fills, some lines, some points, markers that can be repeated randomly, and dropped them into a style, which is reusable. And I dropped it on the internet. And then somebody picked up that style and the next day said, look at this map of the Netherlands I made. I was like, whoa, this is crazy, right? Mind blown. The entire country of the Netherlands in high resolution, mapped literally in the hand of George Washington. That's remarkable and fun, right? It's engaging. If you can make a map that's engaging, I mean, you're miles ahead. Speaking about engaging maps, this is a popular one at this conference, right? I mean, I'm rereading this series right now. I'm at the part where they're about to leave the mines of Moria. They've woken up the Balrog. Anyways, how many of you have pored over this map like I have, right? Middle Earth. Very simple map. I mean, like we were saying, it's not necessarily a plausible map, but neither are Balrogs. And I was looking at this and I love this map, and there's just something amazing about it. And these are the kinds of maps that we see for the first time when we're kids. Maps like this in books, you know, the inside cover of a book. You know, we play video games and we see those maps, and there's something engaging about it. And I looked, and it's just really this simple circle pattern with a ring of trees and some stumps at the bottom. And the mountains are just this basic mountain block repeated over and over again, tightly vertically oriented. And I was like, can we do this in the digital environment and make a reusable template so people can crank out Middle Earth maps? I don't know, let's try it. So I made some assets. I didn't harvest the actual assets like I did from George Washington for, you know, legal reasons. I didn't want to actually steal content from the map, so I just drew similar circle patterns that repeated well, dropped them into some points, lines, and polygons, and then found a data set. This data set is the land cover of Scotland. Now, there's nothing wrong with this map, right? There's nothing wrong with this map. But there's also nothing wrong with this map. This map is a lot more fun, isn't it? It's engaging in a way that simple coloring in isn't. So here's Central America, the north part of South America. Alaska, beautiful Alaska. The Mirkwood Forest of Alaska, the United States, Asia. Using real data, GIS, and I can zoom in, I can zoom out, I can pan around. And here is, you guys know who this is, right? Okay. Shout out his name. Let's hear it. Imhoff, a Swiss cartographer. It turns out the Swiss do cartography, believe it or not. And they specialize in mountain cartography. So he was the master of topographic painting. And because he painted it, he had this understanding that painters have of atmospheric perspective. Things that are close to you have less atmosphere to travel through, so they're brighter and crisper. They're warm on the sunlit sides, they're cool and blue on the shadow sides. But as you go down into the valleys, you kind of get this dilution of precision and color. And it's just masterfully done, and I thought, gosh, this is really interesting, but can you do something like this in the digital environment? I don't know. I hemmed and hawed, and I tried different things. I sampled pixels from his mountains, the sunlit slopes, the shaded sides, and then pretty much nothing in the intermediate areas, so the imagery would show beneath. And then I sampled the lower valleys. What was the predominant hue he used to push back items in the vertical distance, and then made that transform to fully transparent at higher elevations. And I just started stacking up DEMs. So I've got a couple of hillshade models I made, and then that elevation mist. I talked about elevation hacks last year. And I was like, can this be done, right? I am a cartographer. Let's give this a go. So here is Scotland again. Here's Scotland with typical hillshade. Here's that hillshade with Imhoff-like hues applied with transparencies in the midtones. Here is multi-directional hillshade. Now, multi-directional hillshade does a good job of showing like the subtle nuances of places, but not necessarily the overall structure. And I was like, wow, which one do I like better? Here it is with that hue. And I was like, well, I don't have to choose because there's so much transparency. I can just stack them on top of each other. And it looked like this, and I feel like I got the best of both worlds. But I still haven't gotten that atmospheric perspective of lower elevation areas. And so I pulled in just a standard digital elevation model, but instead of the standard black to gray to white, we applied the mist layer. And all of a sudden, we've got something that, it's not like Imhoff himself painted this, right? But it's Imhoffish, it's Imhoffian, it's Imhoff-like. It feels to me that it's something inspired by Imhoff, and it was created as the result of looking at his work and asking myself what made it special and beautiful. And because it's a style, you can use it anywhere, right? So here's Switzerland. Here are the top most visited national parks in the United States in the Imhoff style. Here's Hood River again. Here's the Cumberland Gap. And when you make something that looks tangibly fake, it's fake. People know it's fake, but they still want to reach out and touch it, right? I want to reach out and touch Anton's map. Of course, he would wrap my knuckles if I tried. But it's a map that asks to be engaged with, and I think that's wonderful. And if you can try to replicate some of that and harness that, you've got the potential to really engage an audience where you might not otherwise. Thank you. Let's eat lunch.